So good afternoon, everybody. I am just delighted to welcome you to the fourth and final lecture of this year's Colloquium series called Thinking Out Loud, Deciphering Mysteries of Our World and Beyond. This series has been going on now, we're in our third year. Is that fourth year, Chris? Fourth year. And it's been really terrific. This year was a banner year. We started off with Eric Jarvis. He came in October with a really fascinating turn on human vocal learning, and he's somebody who's looked at this at the molecular level, but he's also studied songbirds. That was followed by Gilda Berabino in November, who was looking at cell biomechanics as a pathway for understanding diseases like sickle cell anemia and osteoarthritis. And then in February, Fox Harrell gave us a reality check on our virtual reality aspirations and how engineering might refine them in his discussion of the avatar dream phenomenon. This was actually one that I didn't see, so I'm not quite sure what this was, but it sounds really great. I wish I could have come. So today, I'm just thrilled to welcome back one of our own, Lisa Gelobter. She is an accomplished pioneer at the intersection of technology and media. She is an entrepreneur, she's a public servant, and probably best of all, she's a celebrated computer science concentrator in the Brown class of 1991. So, speaking of having one of our own here, I think in many ways Lisa is emblematic of Brown's approach to educating. And she revealed this. There was an interview that she did with Software Development Times that she did, and she talked about her fascination with technology cultivated right here at Brown in our computer science department. And she said, there's so many discoveries to be made. And she's gone on to discover and innovate and invent, all the while collaborating across sectors, across disciplines, learning the tech business world from the inside out, and then moving on into other fields in public service and elsewhere, which is really great, and just thinking big all the way. She played a key role in the creation of Shockwave, the groundbreaking internet technology that enables web animation. She was involved in the development of online video platforms and later in the launch of Hulu. She embraced the role of dedicated public servant and, really has this social consciousness that is so emblematic of Brown's students, and her belief that technology can be harnessed as a force for good. And I'm sure we'll learn more about that. She put her skills to work in the Department of Education, a U.S. Department of Education, helping to facilitate government efforts to increase access to healthcare and improve service benefits and streamline a bunch of other processes in the federal government. So, as a tech leader, she's championed diversity in STEM fields, something else that we've been talking a lot about on this campus, really with a view to breaking down barriers for underrepresented talent and mentoring and helping to build community. Again, very important things. So now what she's doing, she's running a startup, which I've learned is pronounced Techquitable. Did I get that right? Okay, good. And it advises companies in the tech space on how to address bias, discrimination, and harassment. So I'm really looking forward to her talk today, which is Harnessing Tech to Power Social Impact. And we're grateful that this series can bring such wonderful people back to campus. So again, I just want to welcome you. Thank you for coming. And I will turn the floor over to Christopher Rose, a professor of engineering and associate dean of the faculty for special initiatives, who is really the brains and creative genius behind this series. It's true. And he will introduce Lisa more formally. Thank you.
Okay, so this is your water, Lisa, right? Okay, so I won't drink that. Okay, so first off, the first question that I ask at each one of these, this is the 14th. We're up to our 14th speaker. How many people have been here before, have been to a Thinking Out Loud before? Okay, so this is great. So we're slowly making, covering the whole world, essentially. So, I guess I'll get to what the criteria are for being a Thinking Out Loud speaker. But the first thing is that Lisa is our first non-academic speaker. Okay? She's the first one that wasn't a professor. And what's interesting about that is that once upon a time, my first job out of graduate school was in a corporate environment. And when I left relatively quickly, a few years, 5 years, they gave you a big luncheon, to see you off and make you feel good. And they said, Chris, those that can, do. Those that can't, teach. So, it could be that the series is really getting really good. We can attract speakers of Lisa's caliber. Lisa was, got here a while ago. She was one of the early CS people, and you can imagine that as a black kid woman out of New York, right, and one of the few in computer science at the time, it was an interesting sort of go. But the interesting thing about Lisa, to me, is that, and she will deny this, but she's fearless, and she'll say, "I'm not fearless," and those are the ones that you got to watch, because she's fearless, and she's almost like a tsunami. She'll go and she'll do things and go and just whatever obstacles you put in her way, she will find a way to surmount. So the other thing is that she breathes CS, but not in the same way that most. I'm a tech nerd, so, I like writing code, and, I like building stuff. Lisa does a bunch of other things as well, but she just does this CS thing. It's very easy for her, relatively, or she makes it look easy. So that's an interesting sort of thing. And with that, she sees the world in a slightly different way. So those of you that have come to this talk before, you know what that means, that she has a slightly different take on the world, which I call crazy. And that is a prerequisite for being part of this series. So, yeah, Lisa, yes, you are definitely crazy, and but in that wonderful sort of way that does wonderful things for the world. The other thing is, if you look at her pathway through her career, in retrospect, it looks completely planned out and wonderful. It wasn't quite planned out, but that's a special kind of genius, to be able to see what's happening and adjust your approach and your pathway accordingly. So one of the things about Brown that Chris said, and thank you, by the way, Chris, for supporting this series. It's been wonderful, and let's keep on doing it, I hope. Smile, smile. Is that I lost my train of thought just thinking about, oh God, gotta make sure that Chris is happy. But in following the path, she got her technical chops and her technical skills down pat. But she's always, and this is part of the Brown ethos, it's about doing for others and not just for yourself. So Lisa, that's another thing she'll deny. She's very social. She'll, she grabs people and kind of pulls them into groups. So that's another thing that, that makes Lisa kind of interesting and different. And one of the reasons that she has to have been so successful. So, I guess with that, I would love for you to help me welcome our brilliant and fantastic computer science graduate and native daughter, Lisa Gelobter.
Wow, that was a lot. Thank you. Thanks to both of you for the amazing introduction. Just have a little bit to live up to now. No problem. No pressure. No pressure. I got this. I am so happy to have you all here and to be joining you here and kind of have the opportunity to be invited in to speak with you all. This is an amazing lecture series, and I kind of looked at everybody else, and yes, I am by far the only non-academic, and they've just done and explored amazing things. So happy to be here. What I will talk to you all about is so I believe wholeheartedly and fundamentally that we can use technology to solve previously thought to be, oh, hi. Sorry, I'm sorry, pause. I was literally talking about two professors who have really made a huge, huge, huge impact and impression on me, and Dean Barrett-Hageltine was one of them. I literally was talking in 2 hours ago. So hi, I'm so happy to see you. So anyway, sorry. The fact is that we can absolutely use technology to, we can harness technology to solve intractable problems. And so and especially ones that affect disenfranchised communities, right? So that is kind of near and dear to my heart. So during this talk, I will give you some examples about how it's already been done, what the potential is, and how many more opportunities there are to actually make change. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about my journey. President Paxton, and Chris and Chris gave gave some little tidbits into it. But first, I'm a black woman with a degree in computer science, which apparently makes me a unicorn. I am here to say, though, that we exist, and I am hopeful that over the next generation that this will no longer be true. I will say everybody talks about how I am I got my bachelor's degree from Brown, which is true. What you may not know is that it took me 24 years to graduate. So I was a low-income student. I was a Pell Grant recipient. I paid for Brown myself. I worked 40 hours a week to put myself through school. It took me a while. And so this is actually me graduating on what should have been my 20th reunion. Thank you very much. So I am a proud member of the class of 2011, and my favorite part about it is that Brown always sends me these invites for a young alum. I'm like, all right, I'm not sure, the gray, okay. So I spent 20 years, as you guys heard, in the private sector at the intersection of media and technology, and that includes things like Shockwave and Hulu, and then running digital at BET, the television network. Between those three things, my products have literally shipped to billions of people. That's actually not an exaggeration, which is also a little bit daunting. And then what happened was that I got a call from the White House. And so the idea that we could bring the consumer emphasis and a transformative practice to bear in government was the plan. And so from that, I ended up at the White House, and I served as the Chief Digital Service Officer for the US Department of Education. The thing that I hadn't quite grokked until I got there was how I could use my coding skills and my CS degree to literally save people's lives. Like, I just didn't, the two didn't jibe, and then seeing what we could actually do, the potential of what technology can do today, was just driven home to me with what we did in the government. So I'll describe a little bit about what the organization was. So I joined the US Digital Service. This was founded by President Obama in August of 2014. Its mission was to use design and technology to improve the way government serves the American people, and not just at an abstract level, but at an individual-facing level. So most of the projects we work on were, in fact, consumer-facing. And we started where people were literally dying for want of services, so healthcare, for example. Also, we worked in the Veterans Administration trying to help veterans claim their benefits. And then it's not a far leap to understand why we were at immigration, where in 2016, I think we helped 85,000 refugees come into this country and revamp the immigration and the green card process. And then also in education, which was my field, where we tried to help people go to schools that weren't going to rip them off, for starters. And so our whole plan was to use the best practices that have been in place in Silicon Valley for decades and bring them to bear in government. So that was our mission. So this whole thing started with the rescue of healthcare.gov. As you all remember, the initial launch did not go so well. Sadly, no laughing matter, but before the Affordable Care Act, there were 48 million people without health care, and 45,000 of them were dying each year just for lack of health care, right? So 1 in 1,000 people just for lack of health care. When it launched, it kind of blew up. They went out and grabbed 7, they called it the ad hoc team. It was 7 people, and they came on for 6 weeks. The day they came on, they were processing 150 applications per day. By the time they left, 6 weeks later, it was 150,000 applications per day. And so at the end that year, 8 million people enrolled in healthcare, and it has just grown since then to 10 million and 16 million. So the way it worked, and again, this is all just using best practices from the tech sector and applying it here. This was what was originally happening, right? So before the ad hoc team fixed it, the worst case application took 76 screens, and it took about 20 minutes to complete. When they were done, again, 6 weeks later, it was 16 screens and under 9 minutes. And again, this is just by doing things that are normal in private sector. Specifically, they found a bottleneck with the login system, and it was responsible for the largest number of errors. It cost $200 million to build and $70 million to operate per year. And it didn't work. So the error rate was, I think, about 25%. So a quarter of the time you would get an error. And the response rate, the max response rate was 5 seconds, just to be clear, seconds. When they were done, they actually rebuilt it in 6 months. It cost $4 million to build and $4 million to operate. The actual error rate, they broke the load tester. It just worked, and the response rate went down ridiculously. So again, using technology to literally save real people's lives. This is what we're trying to do. So I'll talk a little bit about College Scorecard, which was my first project in government, at the federal government. And it's a really good example of how user-centered design actually altered the course of a project and made a real difference and completely changed the outcomes. So as we are sitting here, you all know a college degree remains the surest path to the middle class. Unemployment rates for somebody with a bachelor's is 3.8%, and if you only have a high school diploma, it's 12%. There's studies that show that over the course of your lifetime, you will earn $1 million more if you have a degree from a 4-year institution. So it's huge. The challenge is that our existing rating systems promote schools for things like being more selective, letting fewer people in, or for if you have new buildings, as opposed to looking at things like metrics of access, affordability, and outcomes. And the challenge is that the largest segment of our population that actually needs to go to school doesn't necessarily know what they should be looking for when they're looking at schools. And so the president wanted to create a tool to change the conversation and have people look at the right things that matter to them about what's going to make for a good school. All right, so the president came out and he made an announcement in August of 13. And he basically was like, we're going to do a rating system. And by the way, everybody freaked out in higher ed. I don't know how y'all felt about it, but it was a big deal. And when I came on, so I started on April 6th. Apparently on April 2nd, there was a meeting with the president where the president got out a sheet of paper, so with the Secretary of Ed and the administrator for the U.S. Digital Service, the president got out a piece of paper, drew a web page, and was like, here, we need to have this, and basically started designing. I do not know when he became designer-in-chief or when we thought that was the right thing for him to be spending his time on. But so I came in where people were like, all right, here's what you got to do. And I was like, that's nice. User-centered design, that's not how it works. We're going to take a step back, and we are actually going to think about what it is that we want to build. So how did we do that? We really wanted to use human-centered design, right? That is the objective. That is the thing that puts the user first, where you can focus on outcomes and not outputs. It actually reduces waste. It is critical to kind of modern-day product development. So how did we do it? Again, as I mentioned, I had been in DC a very, very short amount of time, and I did not know anybody there who had kind of high school or college-age children. And I'd been there like a week or two, and I was breaking out in hives because I was like, I need to talk to some students. I got to figure out, like, I have to ask students how it is that they search for colleges and how it works, right? I need to actually talk to some users. And I'm getting really anxious about how to do this, and somebody on my team finally says, we could go to the mall. And I was like, oh, that's genius, the mall, where the stores are and the youth hangs out. She was like, or the Washington Mall right outside the building, which it turned out to be a genius idea. So we literally went and just started accosting people coming out of the Air and Space Museum. But it was fantastic. We got, like, there was spring break, so we got a ton of people who were there on spring break, who were touristing, and they didn't have anything better to do but to talk to us. When you walk up to somebody and be like, hi, I'm from the White House, can I ask you a few questions? You would be surprised at how much they will talk to you. So from that, we got to talk to people from like Wyoming and Nebraska and parents and students. And it wasn't, we also talked to some people who were from college, and that wasn't the only user research we did, right? We talked to a public school in Anacostia, we talked to a charter school in the South Bronx. We did a lot more than that, because there is a certain privilege with being able to get on a plane and come to DC for spring break. But so it really was about figuring out how people operated. This was my favorite quote. which for the record, I'm from New York City. I do not know what a rabbit harness is. But the thing that I will say about this was this proved that high school students understood how to do comparison shopping, right? They were talking about, oh, if you watch a video of a horse, you got to watch it all the way through. Anyway, again, all things I did not know what a 4-H club was. But it's fascinating to see that they actually knew how to do the behaviors, but they were not applying it to looking at schools. They saw them as completely separate things, which was really a very interesting learning for us. So from that, we created what we call a problem statement. So our problem statement was to engage and educate potential college students of any age or background and those that support and advise them to find schools best suited to them. You will notice this does not say build a website. It focuses on the problem that we are solving, not the how, which is critical. So through this process, we identified 2 key products to develop. The first was a consumer tool, which we actually built mobile first. And while I think it's lovely, it's totally legit, the number of people who came up to me were like, oh my God, this looks nothing like a government website. This is the best thing since sliced bread, which again, I appreciate, but it's just a website. But it worked really well in terms of being effective at capturing what we had gathered from our user research. So the idea was that we, at first blush, wanted to showcase the metrics that you should be looking for, right? So it was so funny, when we were doing user research, everybody said, first of all, I don't know what happened to high school students, but they were all like, I know exactly what I want to major in. Every single one of them. And it was all like accounting or nursing, or one was forestry, again, 4-H. And it was just really interesting, and they all said that they wanted to go to a public school. But when we asked why, they were like, because it's cheaper. So it wasn't so much that it was public, but they didn't necessarily understand that if you have financial aid, a public school is not necessarily cheaper. And so one of the things that we did, if you notice, on the search, we didn't let them select public or private, because we wanted to get them to a place where they were thinking about the right metrics. Under advanced search, you can actually do it if that's really important to you, but it wasn't one of the first things that we let them do. But what we did have is we wanted to showcase the core things that they should be looking at, especially if a school is under monitoring, for example. So, and then they could dive in a little bit deeper, looking at graduation rates, because one of the things for me is if the graduation rate of your school is 15%, you should not go there. It means you won't graduate. And so trying to get people to look at that and pay attention to it, as well as retention rates. And then also looking at how much you'll earn after leaving school, because kind of importantly is how much you'll have to take out in loans to go to that school. And one of the things that I thought was super critical is that it's one thing to kind of look at your number of like 23,000, that's how much you have to take out in loans. But it turns out for a 17-year-old, you actually have to translate it into what does that actually mean? And that's a pair of your sneakers that you bought last month. That's what that looks like. And so having to do that on a monthly basis. And so trying to translate it into words that they will understand. Okay, product number 2 is opening up the data set. Or as we literally, our password on it was, set the data free, exclamation point. And so this is what I would argue is the most important thing we do. So the data set was huge. It was 7,300 schools, 1,902 columns per year, 18 years worth of data. So it was actually the largest, most comprehensive data set that the Department of Ed had ever released. And the reason why this was so important is we were doing user research. We didn't just talk to students and parents. We also talked to journalists and not-for-profit organizations that worked within educational communities, and researchers and policymakers, because ultimately, it wasn't necessarily just about reaching consumers, but we wanted to change the conversation about what made for a good school. So this is what the data set originally looked like. This is like the most minuscule snapshot of it that I could do that would actually still fit on the screen and be legible. So we created a data kind of site, a repository where you could go and it had some key insights, and it was really, you could customize different data sets and download different ones to make it more legible. Most importantly, what I would argue that we did is we created an API, application programming interface, that allowed other people to access the data. So here's what we know. Not everybody is going to come to an ed.gov website when they are trying to search for colleges. And what we say in media is you got to get your content out to your user on whatever device your user is on, whenever they're looking for it. So you have to get it to them. And so creating an API, here's the other thing. The Department of Education is super, the Department of Education cannot say this is a good school and this is a bad school. Because how do you compare a Howard University, historically black college university, to a Harvard? How do you compare a Divinity School or Berkeley School of Music to an MIT, right? It's not that one is better than the other. It depends on what's important to you, what you're trying to do with it. And so it's not for the Department of Education to say one is better than the other. However, there are, in fact, organizations that are working within communities, specifically underserved communities, that do know their audiences, that know, based on that community, what is going to work for them and what isn't. And so what we wanted to do was we wanted to enable developers to take this data, integrate it into their own tools, so that they could actually get more reliable data. And it worked. We developed this, for the record. We started development on June 18th. The president announced it on September 12th. So in under 3 months. So not for nothing, that's pretty good even for private sector. And I will also say this was the first URL to come out of the president's mouth since healthcare.gov. So we kind of had to work. No pressure, again. Handle pressure really well. So this was it was really incredible because we had people stand up with us because we put people into our beta program. It was a beta program, meaning we were like, here, have some data. Oh, psych, it's gone. We're not going to tell you about it. There's no documentation. We gave it to them August 6th. And 6 organizations within a month had their products integrated and ready and up and going. It was amazing. That's one of the things about working in the federal government. People jump to it because if you give them data, they're all about it, and they really want to take stuff and do really good things with it. I'm going to give you a couple examples of how this data was used. So, on its surface, San Francisco State University and San Jose State University look real similar. Right? They about the same size, they're about the same socioeconomic divisions, minority breakdown, et cetera, right? One costs, San Jose stock costs about $900 a year more if you look at the stats this way. Except it turns out, if you are a low-income student, it actually costs, I'm going with $3,500 more. Not just $900 more. And then it turns out your graduation rate, because this is all the data that we provided, all the detail of which you could slice and dice the data. Turns out graduation rates are also different between the two schools. So if you multiply that out, the cost is actually $21,000 difference. And so the idea is being able to take this data and apply it to this audience, because that scholar match is actually based in the Bay Area. So this is super targeted for the folks that they deal with. Another quick example is College Abacus. They actually created a financial aid calculator used as a proxy, kind of whether you received free or reduced lunch. This team actually thanked us for releasing the data. It was pretty amazing. The thing that they showed is, again, kind of here are some of your typical schools that you might go to. And if you're just looking at sticker price, you're thinking, I'm never going to Middlebury. On the other hand, if you are a low-income student, it's cheaper to go to Middlebury than to go to your local schools. So these are some of the key things. And again, we didn't tell them to do this. We provided the data, and they took this and integrated it into their data set. So a year later, these results, the College Scorecard results, have been integrated into Google search results. So if you actually go and type in graduation rates for Howard or for Brown, there's a little box that comes up, and it shows the data from College Scorecard. So we integrated into that. We're also into several other new rankings, like Wall Street Journal, The Economist, Forbes, and this is the thing that makes me really happy, right? The New York Times said, the data has wrought a sea change in the way students and families evaluate prospective colleges. You have a question? Go to it.
So I noticed that it looks like an ad. I mean, I'm not sure.
It is not an ad. So the way College Abacus works is they do things based on personality, and so they have a several set of different characters. And so the imagination was, if Jane the Virgin were going to go to school, what kind of schools would she go to? And so they actually had a couple of different characters and stuff. They're a phenomenal organization, led by a woman, and have a bunch of female engineers working on the software product. It's so cool. This made me very happy. All right, so what was next for me? The idea was to continue to use technology to solve massive problems. So I'm taking, yeah?
I'm really sorry.
You want me to go back?
Does this still exist?
A college scorecard? It does. I checked yesterday. I don't know when it has been.
Understand what I'm asking.
Yes, I don't know if it has been recently updated, but it has not yet been pulled down. In case, yes. So there's that. In theory, data is data is data, but I'm going to drink my coffee now. There's that. So the idea was to take this same methodology, these same principles, and apply them in private sector. And from my perspective, the effect of corporate culture on underrepresented groups is the next big frontier that needs to be disrupted. So what I've been saying is, if we can send a Tesla Roadster into outer space, we can actually try to fix some of the problems that are happening here on this planet. I have issues. But the whole point is I decided that it was time to try to make some real change. These issues, as you have likely seen in the press over the past year, are pervasive. There's been a ton of press, but what might not be apparent is the full extent of these issues. As many as 85% of women are harassed at work, and up to 94% of them do not report it. And these are just issues of gender. So I feel like if we reduce discrimination in the workplace, it'll open up more opportunity for women and people of color to join and to thrive, and that's important for both employees and for companies. So evidence strongly suggests that a racially diverse tech sector translates into stronger financial performance. And I'm sorry, not just the tech sector. So a McKinsey report shows that companies in the top quartile in terms of gender diversity are 15% more likely to have higher financial returns than their national median. And if they have racial diversity, it's 35% more likely. There's real benefits at the bottom line. There's also a linear relationship between racial and ethnic diversity and a company's financial performance. So for every 10% increase in racial and ethnic diversity on the senior executive team, earnings before interest and taxes rises 0.8%. And then one study by Intel found that the tech industry could generate an additional $300 to $370 billion more each year if the racial and ethnic diversity of tech companies reflected that of the workforce, of the talent pool. So it's not just a moral issue, it's a business imperative. And as industries continue to grow, it's really important to harness the talent of all Americans. So I founded Techquitable to try to help solve some of these issues. Techquitable, it's equitable with a T in front. And we are trying to use technology to make workplaces more equitable. So we have created a third-party confidential software platform to address issues of bias, discrimination, and harassment in the workplace. So for example, if my boss told a racist joke, that is not the totality of who he is. I'm not going to HR for that, right? That's the nuclear option. It's a big black mark on his record, a big black mark on mine. But I want him to stop telling racist jokes. However, if my boss sexually assaults me, I want the company to take immediate action. And so what we try to do is provide advice and help employees figure out what to do in either of those situations. And at the same time, companies want to improve their culture, but they don't have a sense of what's happening on the ground in the day-to-day. And so we also try to provide them data that reflects that so they can actually understand what's happening at their companies. So here's how it works. If an employee is being made to feel uncomfortable in the workplace or being harassed, they will open up our app and learn about what their options might be, or they can choose to speak with a professional advisor confidentially. And while all that's happening, we will be gathering data, both quantitative and qualitative, to identify systemic issues within the organization and provide a report back into the company's leadership alongside actionable recommendations. So there are a few things that make us unique. A lot of people right now are focused on sexual assault. You have a question?
Is that solicited or unsolicited? It's going back to the company.
It is anonymized and aggregated. So it is part of the service that we're providing is to provide data back into the company. To that extent, it is solicited, but it is confidential. It is it is anonymized, and it is so that we're not disclosing what individuals. So we're looking at trend data. Yeah. Okay. So some of the things that make us unique is that we're not just focused on issues of gender, but also of race, of transphobia, of ageism, of parental status or immigration status, kind of all of the isms. And we're also not just focused on severe issues of sexual assault, but also kind of the range from more subtle to severe. And part of that is because research has shown if you can get in front of the more subtle issues and put interventions in place, you can prevent them from escalating, so the big issues don't happen. We're creating a learning platform here. And so one of the things that might happen is you can come and you can get advice, you can talk to somebody, but what we found, again, through user research, because everything is about user research, is we found that people in this day and age are so used to self-serving, they didn't actually necessarily want to talk to a human. They wanted to be able to figure out what the platform looked like and click around themselves. And so what we did was we created a digital platform to mimic the Ombuds model. You all have an ombudsman here. And it's things like if you want to get a script that you go back and talk to your boss or your coworker or HR, you could do that. Or here are 3 different kinds of emails that you might send depending on the outcome that you're looking for. And my favorite is, again, in talking to users, so many of them said, well, how do I know it's not just me? Am I being too sensitive? And so what we did was we created a library of stories where people could see themselves reflected without having to take aggressive action. And so you'll see a story of like, he told me I'd be prettier if I smiled more, which happens to all of us. And so you could actually see, you say like, any woman in the room or anybody in the room who's been told, you'd be prettier if you smiled more. Can you raise your hand? Yeah, okay. So being able to kind of see what somebody else did and what action kind of resulted from it was the idea there. And then similarly, we want to help companies create a culture where if you see something, say something. We wanted to provide them data so they could make concrete change, and so we can start to see kind of a virtuous circle here. So all this stuff that we're doing around, right, we envision a future where everyone can bring their whole and best selves to work. But for us, this is really important. This is the same principle that we applied in government and in private sector before, which is using lean principles, build, measure, learn, and user-centered design thinking, all of that stuff. This is exactly how we're going about it. All the same exact principles apply no matter what kind of project you're working on. And I think you can make real change. So for us, we are starting with 5 industries that have been shown to have problems. So tech, media and entertainment, finance, legal, and restaurants and hospitality, because this is not just a white-collar issue. And so it is also really, really important to tackle this in tech. And so this is one of our approaches. So studies reveal huge racial disparities in the tech workforce compared to the private sector overall. The reason it's so important is tech is the fastest growing industry in the US. The tech sector accounts for 8% of the total of the US economy, but it's not drawing in employees from all sectors or communities of the country. And therefore, it's unable to fill the positions. So today, there are 500,000 open jobs in tech, and by 2024, it's predicted that there will be 1.8 million jobs that go unfilled. So the gap is not a problem just for individual companies, but for the US economy as a whole. And these are good paying jobs. So they are jobs that have the ability to turn around the fortunes of an entire sectors of our population. And more pressing than the sociology of racism and discrimination is its practical effects. There's a widening wealth gap between blacks and whites. This is the stat. The wealth gap in our country, it will take 228 years for black families to amass the wealth of white families. And also, according to CTIA, the annualized average wage for a tech industry worker was estimated to be over $108,000, which is more than double the national wage. So these jobs can help reverse the trend. So issues of diversity in the tech industry are evident not only when it comes to hiring, but also retention. So many people are focused on pipeline, but it's not just a pipeline issue. There is a tech leaver study that showed that 78% of tech workers say they're being treated unfairly, and 40% of them say this is the #1 reason they leave their companies. Not for another job, not for a better paycheck, because they're being treated unfairly. And then the stats show that white women leave tech at a rate 2 times that of white men, and blacks and Latinos leave at 3.5 times the rate of white men. Attrition due to discrimination and harassment isn't just a social justice issue. It costs the US billions of dollars each year and threatens our economic competitiveness. So by using technology to solve for discrimination and harassment in our workplaces, we can engender a whole new thriving opportunity for underrepresented groups to be a major part of the digital revolution. Absent major changes, the tech industry will continue to perpetuate existing forms of bias and discrimination, which pose legal, financial, and reputational risks. The fact that women and people of color represent such a small portion of the tech workforce threatens our country's continued economic prominence and risks our future competitiveness. In this day and age, our CS jobs are not just to sit in a dark room and code. Tech is everything, and everything is tech, and we can all be activists. So you can literally be saving lives and impacting the US economy. So we need more stories in our life. Wakanda forever. That's it.
So first off, all right, that worked. So
It's on.
questions?
Great, we're going to solve all the world's problems.
Hi, thank you so
Hi.
much. My question isn't about tech, it's about education.
Okay.
And not higher education. I'm talking about early childhood education, elementary school education, where teachers are predominantly female and paid really badly and treated really badly. I am an education consultant, and I work mostly as coaches for teachers, mostly in very small communities around the country. And over and over and over again, I hear just amazing stories about how one woman told her principal that she was pregnant, and she was told, you have to decide, are you going to be a teacher or a mother? Or one person was coming back to work after her second child, and when she showed up at school, she was told that now that she has a second child, her hours have been reduced to part-time. Like totally illegal things.
Yep.
And when I say to these women, this is totally illegal things, they say, yes, but this is the community where I live, where my kids are going to school, where my husband owns a small business. I'm not going to fight it. And so it's a systemic problem. And I don't know how to respond.
It's a challenge. And the issue is there's not a good answer. And so part of what we're doing in terms of Ombuds and providing advice to people is trying to focus on the outcomes that they're trying to achieve, and then talk about ways that they can get there, but also looking at the pros and cons. And the reality is we don't live in an ideal world. And the fact is that if you do actually go to a lawyer, it can be the end of your career, unless you want to move. I think the only thing that so it's kind of getting to the bottom of trying to figure out what it is that they want to have happen, and then helping them figure out an action plan to get there. So if that means going back and presenting a case or an argument, or here are all the reasons why I shouldn't be made part-time, or You can't say that shit to me. Sorry. That's one thing. That's one alternative and one option. But also sometimes the right answer is change jobs. Like there's kind of it runs the gamut, and it really is about working with them on an individual basis, given what their culture is and at the organization and what it means and what their options are and what's important to them. And sometimes it's self-care and suck it up. So there's not a good solution, and so we'll continue. So again, if they might have I don't know about that level, but like trying to. So there's a alliance of schools in Los Angeles, which is actually thinking about using our service. So there are places that are trying to be progressive about it, but if you're not one of those, it's really hard. Sorry, I don't have a better answer.
Hello, and thank you
Hi.
for your talk. As a woman in STEM, it's always wonderful to hear representation from other women in STEM. Actually, I had more of a comment than a question, but it's about Shuri, and this is kind of a spoiler alert, but sorry.
You
At the
mean
very-
for Black Panther?
Yeah, for Black Panther. There's so basically at the very end, how do I say this without? So basically at the end, we're left with like the UN press conference.
Yeah.
And then T'Challa goes back into like where
Oakland.
his uncle. And all that happened was like, I'm gonna build a foundation here, and I'm gonna bring the tech to like the children of like underserved and marginalized communities. I actually went to another panel about Black Panther, and a point was brought up, which was that it is negligent of popular culture and media to take the easy way out of saying, in the future, tech will solve everything. And that tech must actually, in fact, work in tangent with policy, with other divisions of labor and economics, so that it can actually become a more interdisciplinary area and field. And I think that your position as someone who worked in the White House, someone who worked in the private sector, speaks a lot to this. And I just wanted to make that comment because your last thing that you said was tech was everything. But I want to push back on that and say tech is not everything. And in fact, the phrase that tech is everything is one of the things that leads white men to thinking that the world is their oyster. And so I don't know. That was my comment on that.
All right, that's fair. So what I said was tech is everything and everything is tech, meaning that technology can be used in every sector, in every vertical, in policy, in education, across the board. So it's not that tech runs the world, as it is that tech can power and influence and make change and be really effective across different verticals and industries and segments. But I would also say that I refuse to cede tech to white men. That's not, just because I say tech is important, that does not mean that white men rule the world. That's not, first of all, there's also not just this country. And so it's really, I can't go with you, but I understand your point around, my point was tech is embedded within everything, and that we actually can affect change across industries and segments. So, but yes.
Hi, thank you. I really appreciate the speech. I think it allows me to reimagine tech and the ways in which it can change the world that we live in. And my question is actually related to your work experience. So you started with the private sector, and then you transitioned into the public sector, and then you again dived into the private sector. So I just want to ask whether your work experience in the public sector has changed or modified or improved or just add value to the way that you tackle the private sector.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's too broad.
No. No, it actually, it jives right with a thing that I talk about. So when I left the White House, I basically got to decide what I wanted to be when I grew up. all over again, right? Like that's the beauty of it. It was kind of a clean slate. I got to decide, did I want to go back to media? Did I want to go back to software? Did I want to do something in education? Did I want to do something in diversity and inclusion? So something with social impact, kind of like I had a lot of options that I was kind of all considering. And when I wanted to take some time and kind of think about it. And my original instinct was, look, I'm not a goody two-shoes. I did my service. I'm glad I did it. I did my time. It was kind of like Peace Corps. Like I did my 2 years. I'm glad. I'm going to go back and, again, I come from a low-income background. I still support my family. There's money. Like I need a job. I need something that actually pays me. And so I was like, oh, I'll go to a big software company. It'll be good to do that. And then I was thinking about it. So I was talking to Google and Facebook and the likes. And I realized that I didn't want to put my name to the products that they were building. Not that they're not great companies, but it wasn't what was important to me anymore. And so, for example, working at BET, which was a television company, BET gets a bad rap. But at the end of the day, what their mission and their brand is about respect, reflect, elevate. So they actually work towards social justice and social activism for the Black community, which is a great mission for a television network. And yet, and still, for me, the end result was like, so tune in to BET, which was really hard for me to like kind of be like, yes. And that's what I ended up feeling about some of the other companies that I was looking at. And I decided, it turns out mission orientation was really important to me. And what I say about government, right, so my products, again, ship to billions of people. But at Ed, if I could help one person go to a college that wasn't going to rip them off or figure out how to pay off their student loans without going into bankruptcy, like that would have been enough. The fact that I could do it for millions of people was everything. And so taking that and translating it and continuing on that path, I ended up deciding that it was really, really important. And there was just an opportunity here. So part of the reason why I'm doing Techquitable now is because I had a friend who, she's at Spelman. She's graduating, Spelman Historically Black College and University. She's graduating in computer science. She's a senior. And she called me up and she was like, hey, should I come out and work in Silicon Valley? And my problem was, until I could say to her unequivocally that she would be welcome, that she would thrive, and that she can be really successful there, like it just made me realize that there's still so much work to do. And women and folks of color who are coming up behind me, 20 and 30 years behind me, are still going through the exact same issues that I went through. And for me to be able to stand up and make a change, and so part of the reason why I can do it is because my record is kind of unimpeachable, right? Nobody can say, oh, you're just saying this because you weren't able to be successful because you're a girl, because you're Black, whatever it is. Like, I can actually stand up and not take dings against my character because I've proven myself. And so being able to stand up and make a difference and try to change things for the better now that we have a moment and an opportunity. So yes, working in private sector and actually understanding what it's like to be mission-driven and to be able to make a real difference is something that it turns out it's harder to let go than I originally thought.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I work for a Fortune 100 company, and I'm wondering if your business model has proven profitable and how it has proven profitable.
Yeah, sure. So one, we're a startup. Which means that we are just starting up. So we have 5 paid customers right now, including, I'm on camera, including Twilio and a few others that you will have heard of. So it's. So you asked about profitability, and the answer it is absolutely profitable. So here's the thing, is that the market is huge. The way we talk about it, as long as there's discrimination, bias, and harassment within workplaces, we will still have work to do. So unfortunately, the opportunity is huge. And what we talk about, so an Ombuds model, which is, I kind of didn't go into the details of it, but the model that we're using, which is Ombuds or an ombudsman, has been proven at Fortune 100 companies. So American Express has a team of them, McKinsey, Coca-Cola, but it's been shown to reduce their legal costs by 50 to 80%. So the bottom line, it's really easy to walk into a CEO's office and say, look, the ROI, return on investment, pays for itself if we can prevent one lawsuit or even the risk of a lawsuit. So from a profitability perspective, in terms of, I mean, that's kind of the, I always try to take the positive side as opposed to like the negative side. So it improves employee engagement, trust in an organization. It improves diversity, retention, attracting top talent. Like there's all kinds of pros and reasons to do it. And there's also financial bottom lines about why there's a direct correlation. And so the amount of, the cost of using our service, of paying for our service, actually pays benefits immediately, especially because you're getting real data that you haven't had access to before. Yeah, so it's the ROI on it is pretty compelling. Yeah. That one's on, I think. Okay.
Hi. These companies that are using TechQuitable, what do they do with the data internally? Do they find that sharing the aggregate data is helpful for the development of the culture? What are the thoughts about that feedback to that community, those communities?
Totally. So the way we are looking at it now with organizations is we actually require a commitment from the organization. So the C-suite actually has to be on board because, without that, nothing succeeds. The other thing is HR teams need to be on board because if we are throwing stuff over the wall and it's dropping on the floor, then nobody wins, right? Not the employee, not us, not the company. And so working really, really closely with them for that. Today, companies are doing things like culture surveys every 6 months or every year, but it's all reactive data, right? What we're doing is we're gathering it in kind of pseudo real time. So we're actually showing them real trends about what's happening at their organization, whether they're having issues around gender or around race, or is it in their marketing departments versus their sales departments versus their engineering departments? Or is it first-level managers all need communication and empathy training? And so we are giving actionable recommendations alongside the data, the trend data. And we're also requiring that we come to speak at your all hands once a quarter. Because one, it shows that, it reminds people of the service. Two, it shows that the company is invested enough that they're going to take 3 minutes of their all hands to do it. And three, we're actually going to show that the data that you're feeding in is actually taking real action. So great question, but we're trying to close the loop on all of that. So employees can start seeing the reaction to the data as well.
I noticed in your stills from your app, and just now you mentioned trainings. But have you thought about more real-time education opportunities for people? It's the flip side of the coin, because I know my mom works at a university, and there are a lot of trainings that happen, and her opinion of them is that all they do is to teach people how to get around the rules and how to hide all of their behaviors. And so I guess because of that, I'm kind of skeptical of just using training as a catch-all to cure these things. So I wonder if you're thinking about strategies to educate people in other ways? Yes.
So trainings are not kind of the end-all and be-all for the service at all. It's just that was kind of one of the offshoots in terms of what a recommendation could be. In fact, depending on the research that you're talking about, so for example, unconscious bias training is a thing that a lot of companies get, and they feel like they have checked off the box. Turns out if that is all you do, it is worse than not having done it at all. So you really have to take a comprehensive approach. So I didn't mean to imply, training solves everything. That was one particular example. One of the things, however, we are thinking about is trainings. So there's a bunch of states where it's mandatory, depending on the company side, to do sexual harassment training. But the trainings are, a lot of them, not very compelling, shall we say. And so one of the things that we might contemplate in the same way we have stories that might reflect an employee's perspective, we might start to create a database around managers' perspective. So we've had people say, allies and bystanders, say that they will come and use the platform as well because they want to make sure they're not accidentally saying stuff that it wasn't intentional, right? And so we might continue to build up that library so that you can start to see if something is happening or an employee comes to you and says something, how you can respond, how you can react, how you can create meetings where everybody feels like their voice can be heard, right? Where people are not being talked over. So it's not necessarily this is what the definition of sexual harassment is, do not touch that woman, that kind of stuff, but also trying to be more grounded in real scenarios and real circumstances for companies. So that's a thing that we're thinking about doing. Yeah.
Let me nerd out just for a second because I can't help myself. What you have here, it feels like it's almost like a sensor network, right? You're kind of tapping into the zeitgeist of a particular community. So is there, might there be plans to take this a little bit farther along? Because, you could imagine that there's lots of stuff in just the general zeitgeist and experience set that nobody really knows about. And so I'll stop there.
Okay. I think part of our secret sauce is going to be the data science of it all. So it's not just going to be able to be looking at what's happening in an individual company, but also what's happening across verticals. So again, not for a particular industry, but across verticals, for companies at various sizes. So I think as we kind of gather more and more data, I think that's where a lot of our secret sauce is going to be. That's going to allow us to do a lot more studies, to also be able to look at what interventions actually make a difference, to make best practices and recommendations. Ultimately, at the end of the day, right? I want to be able to say from my friend from Spelman, like, actually, we have changed the industry, and now it is welcome to all, and people can bring their whole and best selves to work. And the only other thing that I would say is, this was kind of I talk about the things that I am working on, whether it is education or whether it was trying to prevent harassment in the workplace. But all of this stuff, I guess, like, it's all grounded in CS. Like, I still consider myself an engineer. All the stuff that we're doing is really about using tech, harnessing it for good and for social impact. And so, and that's just to say, again, like, I've been a television network executive, I've been a White House employee, I'm now the CEO trying to fix this thing. All of these things can be done. You can do anything, even if it's not everything, with tech. And so that's kind of the theme that I wanted to kind of make sure that I circled back to.
And one last nerdly question. How do you avoid, people report, they self-report, and it's anonymized and like that. How do you avoid alt.news in that sort of environment?
Alt.news. What?
Spamming, spoofing.
Yes, okay. There's a difference between anonymous and confidential. So anonymous means, so if I'm doing a report into HR anonymously that says, Joe grabbed my ass yesterday, what is HR supposed to do with that? Hey, Joe, what I had heard was, like, that doesn't, there's nothing that, right, there's nothing, if it's anonymous, there's nothing that can be done. And so part of what we do, so we actually talk about being confidential. So we anonymize and aggregate the data, so we don't collect PII, and that's why we look at trends. If somebody wants to file a complaint, we will help them do that, talk about the steps, talk about who they need to contact, what it's going to look like, what their expectations should be, what the timing looks like, what data they should provide, all of those things. But at the end of the day, they have to report that and say what that is. In terms of the application itself, when you first come on, we actually send you a magic link to your work email address because we need to confirm that you actually work at that company and you're reporting data for that company. But then when you come back, we don't know who you are. We don't gather any PII. So we've confirmed that you are a legit employee, but that's it. We don't know your name. We don't know nothing. So, all right.
Okay, anyone else? All right, Lisa, thank you so much.
Thank you all.